Hey, I'm Fernando. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can deploy your self-hosted version of OpenReplay into your Azure Cloud account. So let's go. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a virtual machine. So here from the homepage of the Azure portal, go into the virtual machines section and start creating your first instance. Here, most of it is going to be left by default, but here we're going to leave the resource group empty so that Azure creates one for us. I'll set the virtual machine name to OpenReplay and then jump straight to the image, which by default is the one we want. It's the Ubuntu server 2004 LTS. And then in the size selection, make sure you select at least an option with 2 virtual CPUs and 8 GB of RAM. Then make sure that you take note of the Azure user, which you're going to need later on. And make sure that the SSH public key source is set to generate a new one. Also select the HTTP and HTTPS ports and go into the next step, which is the disk selection. For the storage, we need at least 50 GB. So make sure that you select the 64 GB options and leave the rest with the default options. With that out of the way, just keep going until the end of the process, because everything else by default is correct for what we need. Here, make sure you download the private key we just created. This is going to be a PEM file that we're going to use to SSH into this virtual machine in a minute. Here we're bringing the terminal because we want to SSH into the virtual machine. For that, first we have to set the permissions on the file to be 400. Otherwise, the SSH command will not connect. And then using the line as shown in the screen, you can SSH into the computer that we just initiated. Here's where you will use the Azure user and you're going to get the public IP of your instance, going into the list of instances or clicking the go to resource. And then as you can see on the details, the public IP address, you have a button to copy it and use that. Once connected to the computer, just start cloning the repository, the OpenReplay repository, and then enter into the scripts Helm charts folder, which is where everything that we're going to need is located. For the installation, set the environment variable domain name to whatever your domain is going to be, the one that you're going to use to reach OpenReplay, and then call the init.sh installation script. While the installation goes on, we're going to go to set up the DNS for our domain. So type on the search bar DNS and go into the DNS zones section. There, create a new DNS zone and just make sure you select the right resource group, the one we created before. And then on the name, just enter the main domain name. In our case, will be testdomain.com, and just going to review and create. With the zone ready, add a new record set. We're gonna want to add a record pointing to the public IP of our instance. So the A record will be named OpenReplay, so that we know that OpenReplay.testdomain.com redirects to the public IP of our instance. At this point, you could also be setting up a load balancer and making sure that the load balancer actually points to the instance. Here's where I'm showing you a default setup, but you can set it up however you want based on your needs and your traffic. We then need to set up the SSL connection to make sure that your OpenReplay instance is behind a secure connection. You could be bringing a certificate from a valid certificate authority. If that's the case, just use that. Otherwise, we provide you with a cert manager script that will generate a self-signed certificate for testing purposes. Just enter the domain name, as you can see here, the one that you will use for the installation, and a valid email address. And then the certificate will be created and installed for you. And the next step will be to enable the HTTP to HTTPS redirection. And for that, we're going to edit the vars.yaml file. In it, just search for force SSL and set to true SSL redirect and force SSL redirects keys. With that, all you have to do now is to reinstall the OpenReplay Nginx, and you do it with that line shown on screen. And when the process is done, your OpenReplay instance is ready to be used. In our case, I'll open a new tab and go into openreplay.testdomain.com/sign up. The first thing I'll see is the warning about the SSL certificate because I created a testing one. In your case, if you're using a valid one, you should not see this. Then the sign up form will appear, and it's important to remember that this form will be disabled after you sign up. If you want to add more people into your team, do it through the configuration options. If you want to know how to do that, check out our documentation. And that's it. You have your self-hosted version deployed. So remember, you first have to set up the infra and then install OpenReplay. For setting up the infra, you first have to create the virtual machine. Remember the minimum viable specs. Then you have to set up the TSL or SSL certificate. In this video, I used a self-signed certificate, but for production, you're gonna have to use a valid one. And then you're gonna have to create the DNS-A record within the DNS zone that we created to point to the public IP of the instance. With the infrastructure ready, you're gonna want to go into the installation step. First, clone the repo, then run the installation script, then generate the SSL certificate if you need to. If you have one from a valid certificate authority, then use that one. Then you're gonna want to edit the configuration file to enable HTTP to HTTPS redirection, which is very recommended. And finally, you're gonna want to reinstall OpenReplay Nginx. If you have questions or doubts about the process, don't hesitate to reach out to us on our Slack channel with the link in the description below, and we'll be more than happy to help you. Until then, catch you on the next one.